Imagine this. A woman wakes up one morning to find her life shattered. Her wealthy husband, the man she thought she'd spend forever with, has left without a word, taking with him not only his promises, but the world they had built together. Left with nothing but her resilience, she vanishes into the shadows, determined to rebuild her life on her own terms. Years pass, and he moves on, never looking back until one fateful day when she returns. But she's not alone. At her side is a child, her child, their child, a young prodigy whose brilliance is undeniable. The once abandoned wife now stands stronger than ever, armed with a secret that will turn his world upside down. Why did he leave? What has she endured in her time away? And what happens when their paths cross again with a genius child in tow? Stay tuned as we unravel the twists and turns of this extraordinary tale of heartbreak, resilience, and unexpected redemption. The day she left, she told herself there would be no looking back, not because it was easy, but because survival demanded it. The betrayal had been too deep, the pain too raw. She found herself in a small town miles away, where anonymity allowed her to begin anew. With nothing but a few belongings and the determination to make something of herself, she worked tirelessly to carve out a life. Along the way, she discovered she wasn't alone in this journey. She was pregnant. The news hit her like a tidal wave, a mix of fear and hope. The child was a product of love, or so she believed at the time. Even after everything, she vowed to give her baby a future filled with the opportunities she'd never had. The months that followed were grueling, balancing work and prenatal care, facing sleepless nights filled with uncertainty. Yet, when her son arrived, all doubts disappeared. He was perfect. It wasn't long before she realized there was something extraordinary about him. By the time he could walk, he was solving puzzles meant for much older children. His curiosity was insatiable, his mind constantly buzzing with questions that would stump even adults. Teachers marveled at his brilliance. But for her, he was simply her son, the light in her darkest days. Meanwhile, her ex-husband's life was flourishing, or so it seemed from the outside. He was the picture of success, his name synonymous with wealth and influence. But behind the polished exterior, there were cracks. Guilt lingered. In the quiet moments, though he buried it under layers of work and distraction. He never imagined that the past would catch up to him in such a spectacular way. The first sign of collision came unexpectedly. Her son, now 10, had entered a prestigious competition, one meant for prodigies from across the country. His talents had earned him a place among the brightest minds, but the judges included someone familiar, his father. When their eyes met across the room, the air grew thick with tension. She hadn't planned for this moment, hadn't rehearsed what she'd say. She didn't need to. The boy's resemblance to his father was unmistakable. And as the man stared at the child, realization dawned like a storm rolling in. He approached her afterward, his face a mix of shock and disbelief. "Why? Didn't you tell me?" he demanded, his voice low but urgent. She met his gaze, unflinching. "You left. You made it clear I wasn't part of your future." He searched her face for answers, but found none. She wasn't going to make it easy for him, not after everything she'd endured. The competition progressed, with her son dazzling everyone in the room. But behind the scenes, old wounds were reopening, and unspoken truths hovered like a specter. He wanted answers, but she wasn't ready to give them. And as much as she tried to shield her son from the turmoil, The tension was impossible to ignore. Word of the boy's brilliance spread quickly. Invitations from elite schools and research programs poured in, along with media attention. For her, it was a double-edged sword. She wanted her son to have the opportunities he deserved, but she also feared what this newfound spotlight might bring, especially with her ex-husband now lurking on the edges of their lives. As the days passed, he began to insert himself into their lives, showing up at competitions, offering resources, and trying to connect with the boy. Her son, innocent and curious, was drawn to the man who seemed so fascinated by him. She watched with a mix of fear and anger as their bond grew, torn between protecting her child and allowing him to make his own decisions. But the past was not so easily buried. Whispers of why he left began to surface, rumors that pointed to betrayal, greed, and secrets that had been kept for years. She started to uncover pieces of a puzzle she didn't know existed. Pieces that hinted at a far more complicated story than she'd imagined. What drove him to leave so abruptly? And why was he so determined to be part of their lives now? The answers were just out of reach, shrouded in shadows. But one thing was clear, this story was far from over. The stakes were growing higher, and the paths of their lives were intertwining in ways neither of them could predict. The boy, brilliant and innocent, stood at the center of it all, unaware of the storm brewing around him. And as the tension mounted, one question loomed larger than the rest. How far would each of them go to protect what they loved? The tension in the room was palpable as the competition entered its final round. Her son, calm and focused, stepped forward to present his solution to a problem that had stumped even the brightest minds. His ex-husband watched from the audience, his gaze shifting between the boy and the woman he'd once left behind. There was something surreal about the moment, as though time itself had conspired to bring them all to this crossroads. When the boy finished his presentation, the room erupted in applause. Judges nodded in approval, competitors marveled, and she felt a swell of pride so profound it nearly brought her to tears. Her son had done it, he'd proven to them world what she had always known. But as the applause faded, reality crept back in. The questions, the conflicts, and the unresolved past still hung in the air. Her ex-husband approached cautiously after the event, his expression a mix of admiration and regret. "He's remarkable," he said, his voice soft, almost reverent. "He is," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. "I want to be part of his life," he added, and the words hung between them like a challenge. She took a deep breath. "It's not that simple. You can't just walk back in and expect everything to be okay." "I know I made mistakes," he admitted, "but I want to make things right for him and for you." His sincerity caught her off guard, but the walls she'd built over the years wouldn't crumble so easily. "You left when I needed you most," she said, her voice steady but laced with pain. "You don't get to rewrite the past just because it's convenient now." As they spoke, her son approached, his curious eyes darting between them. "Mom, is everything okay?" She forced a smile. "Yes, sweetheart. Just talking." But the boy wasn't so easily convinced. "Who is he?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of them knew how to respond. Finally, her ex-husband crouched down to the boy's level, his expression earnest. "I'm someone who wants to get to know you better, if that's okay with you." The boy studied him, his sharp mind already piecing together fragments of the truth. "You're my dad, aren't you?" The words hit like a thunderclap, leaving both adults momentarily speechless. Finally, she knelt beside her son, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Yes," she said gently. "He is." The boy's gaze didn't waver. "Why weren't you here before?" Her ex-husband's face fell, the weight of his past decisions pressing down on him. "I made a mistake, a big one. But I want to be here now, if you'll let me." The boy considered this, his young mind grappling with emotions too big for his years. Finally, he nodded. "Okay. But you have to promise not to leave again." "I promise," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The days that followed were a delicate dance of rebuilding trust and finding a new balance. Her ex-husband worked hard to prove his commitment, showing up for every school event, every competition, every small moment that mattered. At first, she kept her guard up, wary of his intentions. But slowly, she began to see changes in him, an earnestness, a humility that hadn't been there before. Meanwhile, the whispers about why he had left years ago grew louder. She finally confronted him one evening, unable to ignore the nagging questions any longer. "Why did you really leave?" she asked, her tone firm but calm. He hesitated, then sighed. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I was under pressure, family expectations, business deals. I convinced myself that cutting ties was the only way to protect you from the fallout. But I see now that I was wrong." His words didn't erase the pain, but they offered a clarity she hadn't realized she needed. For the first time, she saw him not as the villain of her story, but as a flawed human being trying to make amends. Their son's success continued to grow, attracting attention from prestigious institutions and mentors. But through it all, she remained his anchor, ensuring he stayed grounded despite the whirlwind of opportunities. And as her ex-husband became more involved, the three of them began to forge a new dynamic, one built not on the ruins of the past, but on the possibilities of the future. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, lingering doubts, and unspoken fears. But there was also hope, a fragile, precious thing that grew stronger with each passing day. In the end, their story wasn't about revenge or redemption, but about resilience. It was about the strength to keep moving forward, even when the road was uncertain. It was about love, not the kind that fades under pressure, but the kind that endures, transforms, and rebuilds. As she watched her son stand on stage to accept yet another award, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. This was their story, messy, complicated, and imperfect. But it was theirs, and it was enough.